sometimes you won't go live because of this.
Okay.
Just let it open because sometimes you will hit the button off. That's why the light turning on. And now should be okay. You got the join soon.
Hello. Okay, so we're live. Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody's having a cozy Thursday. Somehow every Thursday since I've been here, it's been a gloomy sort of afternoon. I'm not really sure why that is, but hopefully everyone's having a nice lunch. Okay, thank you so much for joining us again. Okay, my name is Teacher Judith, and we are still on book 1 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So if you're not doing anything, you want to just join us for about an hour of, I think we're on chapter 5, if I remember correctly. We are somewhere in the middle of the train where Harry's just gotten on, and he's met Ron for the first time, and they are sharing Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans, I believe. So that's first few times really, actually no, their first time really talking and hanging out in the train. So Harry hasn't gotten to school yet, but they're on the way there. So I think it'll be quite an exciting, many few moments for this chapter. Okay. So we stopped. Yeah, just here actually. Okay. So the countryside now, flying past the window, was becoming wilder. The neat fields had gone. Now there were woods, twisting rivers, and dark green hills. There was a knock on the door of their compartment, and the round-faced boy Harry had passed on the platform 9 3/4 came in. He looked tearful. "Sorry," he said, "but have you seen a toad at all?" When they shook their heads, he wailed, "I've lost him! He keeps getting away from me." "He'll turn up," said Harry. "Yes," said the boy miserably. "Well, if you see him—" And then he left. "Don't know why he's so bothered," said Ron. "If I'd brought a toad, I'd lose it as quick as I could. Mind you, I bought Scabbers, so I can't talk." Scabbers is referring to his rat, actually, I believe. The rat was still snoozing on Ron's lap. "He might have died, and you wouldn't know the difference," said Ron in disgust. Okay. Actually, before I continue, there's a few. This book is very good at using dialogue tags really well. So previously, also he said, right, he looked tearful instead of simply saying he looked sad or he was crying. Okay. Instead of saying it in such a way, he was this, or I am sad, I am scared. You know, they're showing it, right? He was tearful. That means he had tears in his eyes. Okay. "He might have died and you wouldn't know the difference," said Ron in disgust. "I tried to turn him yellow yesterday to make him more interesting, but the spell didn't work. I'll show you. Look." He rummaged around in his trunk and pulled out a very battered-looking wand. It was chipped in places and something white was glinting at the end. Okay, really good description to show. If any of you are uncertain as to what a wand actually looks like in the Harry Potter series, maybe take a look at the movies, or you can Google a picture of it. But it's basically just a usually sort of twisty looking rod like this, made from wood, all kinds of wood, right? As we learned from the Ollivanders chapter. Yeah. Okay. Unicorn's hair's nearly poking out. Anyway, we know that the wands use 3 different cores, right? They use a dragon heartstring, unicorn hair, and phoenix tail feather, right? So his wand has a unicorn hair in it, which is the white that was glinting at the end. Okay? He had just raised his wand when the compartment door slid open again. The toadless boy was back, but this time he had a girl with him. She was already wearing her new Hogwarts robes. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one, she said. She had a bossy sort of voice, lots of bushy brown hair, and rather large front teeth. We've already told him we haven't seen it, said Ron, but the girl wasn't listening. She was looking at the wand in his hand. Oh, are you doing magic? Let's see it then. She sat down. Ron looked taken aback. All right. He cleared his throat. Sunshine daisies, butter mellow, turn the stupid fat rat yellow. He waved his wand, but nothing happened. Scabbers stayed grey and fast asleep. Are you sure that's a real spell? Said the girl. Well, it's not very good, is it? I've tried a few simple spells just for practice, and it's all worked for me. Nobody in my family is magic at all. It was ever such a surprise when I got my letter, but I was ever so pleased. Of course, I mean. It's the very best school of witchcraft there is. I've heard. I've learned all our course books by heart, of course. I just hope it will be enough. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Who are you? She said all of this very fast. Harry looked at Ron and was relieved to see by his stunned face that he hadn't learned all the course books by heart either. I'm Ron Weasley, Ron muttered. Harry Potter, said Harry. Are you really? Said Hermione. I know all about you, of course. I got a few extra books for background reading, and you're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts, and great wizarding events of the 20th century. Am I? Said Harry, feeling dazed. Goodness, didn't you know? I'd have found out everything I could if it was me, said Hermione. Do either of you know what house you'll be in? I've been asking around, and I hope I'm in Gryffindor. It sounds by far the best. I hear Dumbledore himself was in it. But I suppose Ravenclaw wouldn't be too bad. Anyway, we'd better go and look for Neville's toad. You two had better change. You know, I expect we'll be there soon. And she left, taking the toadless boy with her. I like the description they use instead of just saying it was Neville. But we know that because this is a main characteristic of Neville, we don't know anything else about him yet, except that he was quite careful and he'd lost his toad. Right, so instead, in a comical way, it's sort of like a nod to this one little thing we know about him. So we call him the toadless boy instead of just Neville. Okay. Whatever house I'm in, I hope she's not in it, said Ron. He threw his wand back into his trunk. Stupid spell. George gave it to me. Bet he knew it was a dud. A dud here is basically a slang term to say that it was not working or it was malfunctioning in some way. And George, we know, is one of his elder twin brothers. Okay. What house are your brothers in? Asked Harry. Gryffindor, said Ron. Gloom seemed to be settling on him again. Mum and Dad were in it too. I don't know what they'll say if I'm not. I don't suppose Ravenclaw would be too bad, but imagine if they put me in Slytherin. That's the house you know who was in? Yeah, said Ron. He flopped back into his seat, looking depressed. So we know that Ron does not want to be in Slytherin. Also, we know that Ron is the newest member at Hogwarts from his family. He's got one sister younger than him, but older than him, he's got Fred and George, the twins. Then there's Charlie, there's Bill, there's Percy. Is that it? I think that's it. So five other brothers. So it's a very big family. So 5 brothers ahead of him, plus his parents, the 2 of them. Okay, 7 people in his family have already been in Gryffindor. So he's feeling quite a lot of pressure, right? That he wants to be part of the Weasley family signature and continue to be in Gryffindor, but he's quite worried that it will not happen. So we know that there's some kind of selection process to this, okay, because it's not guaranteed. You know, I think the ends of Scabbers' whiskers are a bit lighter, said Harry, trying to take Ron's mind off of houses. So what do your oldest brothers do now that they've left anyway? Harry was wondering what a wizard did once he'd finished school. Charlie's in Romania studying dragons, and Bill's in Africa doing something for Gringotts, said Ron. Did you hear about Gringotts? It's been all over the Daily Prophet, but I don't suppose you get that with the Muggles. Someone tried to rob a high-security vault. Harry stared. Really? What happened to them? Nothing. That's why it's such big news. They haven't been caught. My dad says it must have been a powerful dark wizard to get around Gringotts, but they don't think they took anything. That's what's odd. Of course, everyone gets scared when something like this happens, in case you know who's behind it. Harry turned this news over in his mind. He was starting to get a prickle of fear every time you know who was mentioned. He supposed this was all part of entering the magical world, but he had been a lot more comfortable saying Voldemort without worrying. Before we continue, okay, this part where they're talking about Gringotts having been broken into, and it's puzzling everyone so much, and it's all over the Daily Prophet, all over their basically local Straits Times, right? But the thing about this is it's become such big news because it is a bank. So most people who rob a bank would be looking for something specific, right? Or they might be just looking for gold, but nothing was taken. And we know from their journey so far that Gringotts is no ordinary bank, right? It's not like a bank you'd see in Singapore where you'd have, vaultier, a couple of employees. No, we know that Gringotts as a bank goes underground. It's got dragons, it's got monsters, it's twists and turns. It's got a roller coaster to get into that will take you down into the vault. There are different weather articles. There are waterfalls, a lake, there caves. It's a winding area, and it's really hard to get into. So the act of someone being so bold to be able to have the idea to, yes, let's rob this bank successfully, is also something that they're probably worrying about, because all these things do not deter whoever is trying to get into the vault. Just something to consider, okay? So we know all these context clues really inform our knowledge so far, okay? Last sentence. What's your Quidditch team? Ron asked. Now we know Quidditch is their sport, right? So, I don't know any, Harry confessed. What? Ron looked dumbfounded. So he didn't look shocked. He didn't look, he didn't just gasp. He looked dumbfounded, okay? He was so shocked, and he was incredibly, how can this be real? Oh, you wait. It's the best game in the world. And he was off, explaining all about the 4 balls and the positions of the 7 players, describing famous games he'd been to with his brothers and the broomstick he'd like to get if he had the money. He was just taking Harry through the finer points of the game when the compartment door slid open yet again. But it wasn't Neville, the toadless boy, or Hermione Granger this time. 3 boys entered, and Harry recognized the middle one at once. It was the pale boy from Madame Malkin's robe shop. He was looking at Harry with a lot more interest than he'd shown back in Diagon Alley. Is it true? He said. They're saying all down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment. So it's you, is it? Yes, said Harry. He was looking at the other boys. Both of them were thick-set and looked extremely mean. Standing on either side of the pale boy, they looked like bodyguards. Oh, this is Crabbe and this is Goyle, said the pale boy carelessly, noticing where Harry was looking. And my name's Malfoy. Draco'. Ron gave a slight cough, which might have been hiding a snigger. A snigger is basically, you could also say a snicker, um, oh, a snicker, or basically a soft laugh that's sort of concealed, but also meant to be in a sort of mocking way. Okay? Draco Malfoy looked at him. Think my name's funny, do you? No need to ask who you are. My father told me all about all the Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford. So we know that this is an extremely rude thing to say. You don't just say this to someone that you just met, whether or not you like them or not, okay? He turned back to Harry. You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. He held out his hand to shake Harry's, but Harry didn't take it. I think I can tell who the wrong sort are for myself, thanks, he said coolly. Draco Malfoy didn't go red, but a pink tinge appeared in his pale cheeks. So, we know that Draco has some... He always refers to his father about everything, right? Like, oh, my father said this, my father said that. Even in their first meeting in Madame Malkin's robe shop, okay, this was the case. And he was very much in the mindset of, like, wizarding families are better than all the others, that Muggle families don't have any place in society, things like that. Okay, and now clearly, because at that point of time, Harry did not want to tell Draco that who he was. So he didn't exchange any pleasantries or names. He just sort of kept quiet and stayed out of it. But now that he knows a little bit more, and he's met people like the Weasleys, who are clearly very kind, who have helped him out, even though they didn't know him, okay, he's quite certain. And he's very strongly opinionated like this, right? So here he's saying, no thanks, I don't need your help specifically. I am good. Okay, and we know by this that Draco is likely feeling very, very embarrassed because he's brought his cronies, right, his 2 bodyguards. He's come over and he said, hey, we actually met before. So is this true? You're this very famous wizard. So I had a chance to be friends with a famous wizard. And now he's been quite blatantly and obviously rejected. Okay, in front of his bodyguard/friends. I'd be careful if I were you, Potter, he said slowly. Unless you're a bit politer, you'll go the same way as your parents. They didn't know what was good for them either. You hang around with riffraff like the Weasleys and that Hagrid, and it'll rub off on you. Both Harry and Ron stood up. Say that again, Ron said, his face as red as his hair, so we know that he was angry. Oh, you're going to fight us, are you? Malfoy sneered. He sneered, meaning he obviously is in a mocking way as well as in a mean way, right? He knows he's calling his bluff and saying, yeah, no, you of all people are not going to fight us. Unless you get out now, said Harry, more bravely than he felt, because Crabbe and Goyle were a lot bigger than him and Ron. But we don't feel like leaving, do we, boys? We've eaten all our food and you still seem to have some. Goyle reached toward the chocolate frogs next to Ron, and Ron leapt forward, but before he'd so much as touched Goyle, Goyle let out a horrible yell. Scabbers the rat was hanging off of his finger, sharp little teeth sunk deep into Goyle's knuckle. Crabbe and Malfoy backed away as Goyle swung Scabbers round and round, howling. And when Scabbers finally flew off and hit the window, all 3 of them disappeared at once. Perhaps they thought there were more rats lurking among the sweets. Or perhaps they'd heard footsteps, because a second later, Hermione Granger had come in. So now all their taunting, okay, just diffused just like that, okay? Gone completely, okay? Because of his little rat. Now, we don't know if the rat understood anything, but he clearly was doing enough, right, in helping Ron in this sense, okay? He bit his knuckle, like this part of his finger, and that was that. We also know that, okay, a couple of things here. So he says, you hang around with riff-raff, like the Weasleys, also another slang term. So it's basically used to, in a demeaning way, you can say these riff-raff, that means these maybe paupers, people who are just not up to some kind of invisible hierarchy or standard. And we know that the Malfoys think Draco Malfoy thinks very highly of himself. So he sees the Weasleys as much below him. And he also said some demeaning things about Hagrid back in the Madame Malkin's rope shop. So he's basically saying all these. And we also know that he is quite rude, but in this case, whatever he's saying here is not just rude, it's very spiteful. It's specifically spiteful. Okay? Like it is meant to hurt and maim. Okay? And we know this is a direct result of being embarrassed by Harry because he'd offer friendship and Harry said, no thanks. Okay? So there's a lot of feelings here. So now quite interesting, okay? The first maybe, we don't know how long it's been, but it's not been very long on the train. Okay, Harry has made a friend. He's also met Hermione and the Toadless boy, Neville, okay? Bit neutral in that regard. Don't know who our friends is yet, but he knows that he's friends with Ron. Now he's also kind of made an enemy, right? Sort of, with Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle. So many very colorful beginnings. Okay, he hasn't even gotten to the school yet. Yes, okay, we were here. What has been going on? She said, looking at the sweets all over the floor and Ron picking up Scabbers by his tail. I think he's been knocked out, Ron said to Harry. He looked closer at Scabbers. No, I don't believe it. He's gone back to sleep. And so he had. You've met Malfoy before? Harry explained about their meeting in Diagon Alley. I've heard of his family, said Ron darkly. They were some of the first to come back to our side after you-know-who disappeared. Said they'd been bewitched. My dad doesn't believe it. Okay, when he says darkly here, it is, you can also say grimly. Darkly, grimly, any sort of this connotation, because it is a sort of, I've heard of them, and in a very bad way. He's sort of wary of the Malfoy family, even though he doesn't know them personally. My dad doesn't believe it. He says Malfoy's father didn't need an excuse to go over to the dark side. He turned to Hermione. Can we help you with something? You'd better hurry up and put your robes on. I've just been up to the front to ask the conductor, and he says we're nearly there. You haven't been fighting, have you? You'll be in trouble before we even get there. Scabbers has been fighting, not us, said Ron, scowling at her. Would you mind leaving while we change? So he also doesn't have a good impression of Hermione. He probably finds that she's very nosy, and she's bossy, right? That's what they said earlier with her tone and things like that. Okay, and he's not wrong. It was Scabbers who technically bit the boys. They didn't actually fight. It was a sort of verbal discussion. All right. I only came in here because people outside are behaving very childishly, racing up and down the corridors, said Hermione in a sniffy voice. And you've got dirt on your nose, by the way. Did you know? Ron glared at her as she left. Harry peered out the window. It was getting dark. He could see mountains and forests under a deep purple sky. The train did seem to be slowing down. He and Ron took off their jackets and pulled on their long black robes. Ron's were a bit short for him. You could see his sneakers underneath them. A voice echoed through the train. We will be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken to the school separately. So here also more information about our characters, okay? Hermione probably doesn't see people or kids misbehaving as a very good thing. She's probably quite prim and proper. She's very confident about how she acts, she speaks. And she's also very blunt. Blunt is the word, okay? Because she says here, right? She says, you've got dirt on your nose, by the way. Did you know? Though most of us may not say that to someone who we don't know very well. So she's got no qualms about it because she's just like, well, I'm just letting you know in case you need to do something about it. Ron, again, is glaring at her. Earlier, he was scowling at her. He does not like her, okay? What else? Okay, they put on their robes. Okay, they changed in the car, okay? And Ron's were a bit short for him. So we know that from previous conversation that his family isn't very well-to-do and that everything is usually hand-me-downs, right? So it's likely that his robes are also hand-me-downs from his brothers in the previous year. Harry's stomach lurched with nerves and with nerves, and Ron, he saw, looked pale under his freckles. They crammed their pockets with the last of the sweets and joined the crowds thronging the corridor. Thronging the corridor means they were gathering in a very, very big group. So typically you can say throngs of people, or throngs of people on Orchard Road, throngs of people at the MRT station, things like that. Okay, it's very crowded. His stomach lurched. This is a good word again. So you don't just say like he felt queasy, for example, right? But in this case, he's nervous, right? He's quite anxious about finally being at Hogwarts because he does not know anything about what to expect. So his stomach lurched. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way toward the door and out onto a tiny dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then a lamp came bobbing over the heads of students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. First years, over here. All right there, Harry. Hagrid's big hairy face beamed over the sea of heads. Come on, follow me. Any more first years? Mind your step now. First years, follow me. So we know that Hagrid had said, right, he's actually the groundskeeper at Hogwarts, so it's likely part of his job. He's here to welcome the first years. Very, very nice. But it's very cute description they use here, right? And then a lamp came bobbing over the heads of students because we know Hagrid is so large and so tall that in that darkness of the platform, because it arrived about evening time, right, it was easy to mistake him for a street lamp because they're very tall and very dark, okay, and you only see sort of like light at the very top. So interesting description. And then he beamed over the sea of heads. So even there, he's being very polite, right? Very nice. He's saying hi to everybody, and he's also making sure that Harry knows that he's right there. Okay. If you can't tell, I'm quite partial towards Hagrid because he was technically Harry's first friend outside of his family, and he's always been very kind to him as an adult. Yes. Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark on either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. You'll get your first sight of Hogwarts in a sec, Hagrid called over his shoulder, just round this bend here. There was a loud, ooh. The narrow path had opened suddenly onto the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. So we know that they are sort of describing the sort of skyline they're looking at, okay? That it's a sort of secluded castle, okay? Flanked by, when I say flanked, I mean surrounded by a lot of trees, forest, okay, as well as a very, very large, they call it the Black Lake, okay? But to us, it would likely look as like a really big river or a sea even because it's so large, okay? Because of course the UK is much, much larger than it is here. We are, so we don't have that kind of water body. Yes. No more than 4 to a boat, Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water by the shore. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. Everyone in, shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. Right then, forward! And the fleet of little boats moved all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. So quite an interesting start, okay? Usually you take the train, you maybe walk a little bit, go through a gate, and you're at school. But in this case, they took a very long train ride to the middle of nowhere. They took a very dangerous, slightly slipping and stumbling, right, on this very dark path that opened to a clearing, and then they realized that they were at the mouth of a very large lake. They got into some boats, okay? And the boats sailed, okay? In this case, we know that if there are only 4 students in each boat, they are not actually commanding the boat. They are not rowing or anything of the sort. So it's likely magically that they are moving, okay? We also know that they describe the lake as smooth as glass. Now, if you've seen any sort of body of water, even let's say the Singapore River, right, you will see usually like a little bit of a current to some degree because of wind, because of any other, But if here they're saying that they're gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass, they're not saying that it was as clear as glass. So they're not saying that you could see into it. But they're saying as smooth as glass, meaning there was no ripple, no wave, nothing. It was calm water. Okay, so it's like welcoming in some way. Okay, and this is also uncharacteristic for water bodies because if they're naturally occurring, okay, they would have a little bit of a ripple. Once the boats move, okay, you would have something, right? But in this case, it's very, very calm. So we could also allude that maybe deduce that maybe it is magical as well. Okay. Heads down, yelled Hagrid as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivy that hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a kind of underground harbour, where they clambered out onto the rocks and pebbles. Okay, very, very, very nice description here. So they reached the edge of a cliff, which is, sort of a side face of a mountain. And they all bent their heads, and little boats carried them under this curtain of ivy. So it's likely that they had sort of vines and tree and flowers and things dangling, and then the boats were going underneath it. Okay, and they're going underneath the castle into an underground harbor. Okay, where they clambered out onto the rocks and pebbles. So clambered here is a good way to say that they didn't just get out of the boat. They didn't just walk out. Okay, they climbed out with some difficulty, usually a bit clumsily. Okay, clambered onto the rocks and pebbles. So, all with difficulty. Oh. Okay. Oi, you there! Is this your Toad? Said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. Trevor! Said Neville, blissfully, holding out his hands. Then they clambered up a passageway in the rock after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto smooth, damp grass, right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around the huge oak front door. Okay, if you know anything about oak wood, it's quite heavy, so they're showing that it's a very grand entrance. Everyone here? You there, still got your Toad? Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. It's a very sort of mysterious beginning. Imagine Hagrid, this very large man with his large lamp, okay, and this huge door that's obviously larger than he is if he's raising his fist to knock on the door. And he's got all these 11-year-old kids who are new to the school, all, little ducks in a row behind him, and they're sort of in a grand entrance. So none of them know exactly what to expect. Okay, so now we're in chapter 7, okay? It's been a journey getting here so far. I can't even explain to you what this image is because, like I said, all the illustrations so far in the beginning of at the very start of the chapter sort of tell you about what to expect in the story, in that chapter, and I have no idea what this is. Maybe it's a goblin, maybe it's an elf of some kind, I'm not sure. Maybe you can tell me what you think this is that he's holding. But we know that it's probably, some kind of magical creature just based off of the shoes that he's wearing and that he's floating, looking a little bit grumpy. The Sorting Hat. Before we get back into it, hi, my name is Teacher Judith. I've been going through, chapter 6 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. We're currently just starting chapter 7. So thank you so much for joining us. It was gloomy earlier and now it's definitely rainy. So thank you for joining us on this rainy afternoon. I hope everyone's grabbing some lunch. Okay, and we'll get into this chapter. Okay. Yeah, if you got any, suggestions for us, any comments you want to let us know, okay, feedback, also just let us know in the chat. Okay, just say, drop a hi, okay, or something. Yeah, thank you for joining us. So, the sorting hat. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fit the whole of the Dursleys' houses in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagged stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closer together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. Okay, now I don't know if any of you remember Professor McGonagall from the very, very first chapter of our book, but she is someone who was present when Dumbledore and Hagrid were delivering Harry to the Dursleys' house 11 years ago, okay, as a baby. So she's very aware of who he is, okay? And she's also obviously someone important to the school, right? So we know that Dumbledore is the headmaster. So Professor McGonagall is actually one of the other main figures in the school that whom we will see quite often. Okay? Yeah, so she's received them, and now she hasn't taken them to the main hall, but she's taken them into a sort of side room, okay, an empty chamber off the hall, so meaning to the side. Okay, for other reasons we will find out soon. Okay, but another thing is how they describe the entrance, right? It was so big you could have fit the Dursleys' house in it. Stone walls were lit with flaming torches. Ceiling was too high, so it gives this sort of grandeur to this space, as well as really depicting this in a way that is we can easily imagine. Okay. And if you know anything about materials, again, marble, very, very expensive material, very long lasting as well. So again, it adds to the how magnificent this place is, okay? And they describe it as such, a magnificent marble staircase. So it's not just a small wooden staircase. It's not like a side concrete stairs in your HDB block. It is probably a very grand stairwell, okay, that's going somewhere. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of the term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony, because while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn you house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting." So they basically sprung this on the 11-year-olds, right? Not only is Harry and the rest of his year very nervous about joining this for the first time, seeing the school, meeting the teachers and other students for the first time, he's now also having to sort of perform in front of this entire school. He doesn't know how the ceremony is going to go, but it's something that's very apparently important to the student body. Okay, so she's already mentioned, right? Your house is so important that it's basically your family. So the whole year is what they're going to spend with their house. So it's likely they go to classes together. Okay, even though the classes are mixed between houses, okay, within their house, if they're in the same year, they probably go to the same classes together. Okay, they will sleep in the same spaces because it's a boarding school. So they are staying at the school the whole year unless it's the holiday time. Okay, and then they have a house common room in which they spend time in. So again, this can be very daunting because Hogwarts is somewhere you go to for about 6 or 7 years. Okay, so it's quite a long-term thing, and you hope to be able to get along with everybody. You can, and that's something that worries Harry, obviously, right? Because he's already met someone that he likes, okay, as a friend. He met people that he's sort of neutral about, and he's also met people that he knows he does not like. So there's a lot of mystery around this, and like who is he going to end up in the houses with, right? A lot of newness to be battling with. Okay. And then she says, smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you're waiting. So she's giving them maybe, I don't know, 5-10 minutes to just worry about their appearance a little bit before they end up standing in front of the entire school. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. I shall return when we are ready for you, said Professor McGonagall. Please wait quietly. She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. How exactly do they sort us into houses? He asked Ron. Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking. It's very much like, I don't know if any of you have older brothers, but this is exactly what they'll do. It might be painless, nothing will have gone wrong, but they will make sure that you are worried about it to some degree. They would have joked about it. So here he says, Fred had told Ron that it hurts. Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test? In front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except for Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she'd learned and wondering which one she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous, never. Not even when he'd had to take a school report home to the Dursleys, saying that he'd somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would come back and lead him to his doom. Okay? So he's so worried about it. He's dreading it so much that he's referring to this experience as his doom. Okay? That means the end of days at the moment because he's so worried about it. Okay? His heart gave a horrible jolt, so his heart jumped and leapt in his chest, right? But in two different ways. When we use that expression, leapt, it could be soaring in a good way, in a happy way. But in this way, it's a horrible jolt, so we know that it is not a good sort of feeling. Okay? He's quite worried about it. And Hermione is babbling, because I know that there are people who maybe freeze when they are scared. Other people flee, and there's people like me also, I do this, okay? When I get really nervous, I start yapping a lot. Suddenly, okay? Because to get the nervous energy out, it happens. Very normal. Then something happened that made him jump about a foot into the air. Several people behind him screamed. What the? He gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed through the back wall. Pearly white and slightly transparent, they glided across the room, talking to one another and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance. My dear Friar, haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, and you know he's not really even a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here? A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. So this is basically old-timey clothing. Okay, that he's wearing a ruff is sort of like a tunic of sorts, okay, and he's wearing tights. So it shows the time period that he's from. Okay, had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. New students, said the fat friar, smiling around at them. About to be sorted, I suppose. A few people nodded mutely. So they were so scared, they didn't know what was happening, okay? Are they all hallucinating collectively? Hope to see you in Hufflepuff, said Friar. My old house, you know. Move along now, said a sharp voice. The sorting ceremony's about to start. Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. Now, notice how casually their entrance came about. Okay, so to the students, this is news. They don't see ghosts ever, right? We probably imagine them in horror movies, but not in this case. They were probably arguing, having a little chit chat, okay, just floating about in the most normal way. And then Professor McGonagall said, "Okay, move along. That's enough chatter." And they just disappeared. They just left. It's the most normal thing in the world. So we know that this is actually quite normal to the School of Hogwarts. So we will see the ghosts again. Now, form a line, Professor McGonagall told the first years, and follow me. Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the Great Hall. So we know that this hall is something of significance. Okay, it's a lot of events happen in this hall. So we'll find it's basically your school hall, but much more grand. Okay, so it's in a stone castle. It is not like a large school hall that is also used as an assembly point as well as a sports hall. Okay, nothing like that. This is very much the Great Hall is, I think, used for giant feasts, so their meals as well as any announcements and assemblies. Okay, so here also, okay, feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead. So lead is a type of metal material that is very, very heavy. So when they say his legs had turned to lead, it means that it's getting harder and harder to move and that he's feeling very stiff because of how nervous he is. Okay, the other expression you probably hear often is his legs turn to jelly because he's so panicked about it, right? But in this way, lead because he's dreading it so much, but he knows he has no choice. He does not want to walk forward. He had a choice, he would not. But in this case, he has no choice, right? Because Professor McGonagall is expecting all of them to file neatly in a row. Okay, and then we describe all the events one after another using all your good synthesis and transformation rules. Okay, so here, Harry got into line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the Great Hall. So again, okay, we know that it's quite a grand entrance because it's likely an arch-shaped door like this of some kind with a knocker. Okay, and they've just walked through it. Harry had never imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in mid-air over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here, so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone misty silver. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upward and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a History." So we know that Hermione knows her stuff, okay? She's obviously been studying quite a bit, and she knows that the ceiling is bewitched. Now, we don't even know what that really means just yet, okay? As we go through the book some more, we'll find out, okay? But the ceiling is inside the room, right? So this room has really high ceilings, and the ceiling, instead of seeing just like wooden beams or the stone top of the castle, okay, we instead see a dark night sky, okay, full of stars. Very, very beautiful. We also know that there's a lot of lanterns and flickering candlelight that's lighting the hall. So it's not just your LED lights and lamps and things like that. Okay, and then now we have a row of teachers, okay, and then probably like a podium, and then the tables here in four long tables, okay. And now McGonagall has led them from somewhere to stand here, okay, between the teachers and the tables at the very start of the room. So now all these tables have many, many students. So you can just imagine how big this place really is. Okay? It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't simply open to the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a four-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. So we know that it's probably quite old, okay? But we don't know why it's dirty and it's used looking, okay? Even though it's something to do with the sorting ceremony. Maybe they had to try and get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought wildly. That seemed the sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. So notice that this is the only thing that Harry knows about magic and hats, right? When we think about human magicians, okay, and pulling a rabbit out of the hat, that's probably the most, that and then having card tricks, like game card tricks, are probably the two standard magic related things that we imagine as humans, okay? Besides actually knowing that they could be real magic being used in any other sort of capacity, okay? So now he's staring at the hat. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hat sleek and tall. Bowler hats are this type of sort of rounded black hat, okay? And then top hats we know are the tall sort, this type of hat. For I am the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. So he can beat them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see. So try me on, and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap. Okay, a very clever little rhyme, to be honest, okay? So we know, okay, these are the traits they're given each house. So Gryffindor, okay? We know that they are brave, okay, very daring, chivalrous, that means they put other people before themselves. They are likely to put themselves in danger or harm's way to take care of them, okay? And then we have Hufflepuff, known as just and loyal. That means very just in their decisions. They want to make things very fair, okay, very loyal, and patient, and unafraid of toil. Toil here means working hard. So we can say toiling day and night. Okay, they're working really hard day and night. So unafraid of toil, they're not afraid to work hard. Yet in a wise old Ravenclaw, okay, you've a ready mind, with those of wit and learning. So that means they are very intelligent, known as very, very, maybe people who want to be researchers, who are always looking for new knowledge, okay, will always find their kind, okay. So this is where Ravenclaws are known to be very, also, if you've a ready mind, meaning you're always ready for the next thing. You're always ready to try new things. You want to get out of your comfort zone, think outside the box, things like that. Then Slytherin. You'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So we know that they're very cunning, maybe very witty as well, similar to Ravenclaw, in that they can think on their feet and they'll do whatever it takes. So maybe leaving no stone unturned. So we can think of that as very daring as well, but also very conniving, could be quite mischievous as well. Not to say that the other houses aren't, obviously, okay? But here they are willing to maybe make decisions that other people may not be quite so willing to. So then he says, so put me on, don't be afraid, don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap. Now, when they say put on your thinking caps, it's, get into the state of mind to think deeply, right? So now he is saying that he is the thinking cap. So you don't actually have to do anything. You just have to go up there, sit on the stool, and put on the hat. and a hat will tell you, okay, what sort of house you're going to be in. Okay. The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables and then became quite still again. So we've just got to try on the hat, Ron whispered to Harry. I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll. So we know that a troll is a type of magical creature, okay? But we don't know anything more than that, okay? We'll find out about it later in the book. But yes, so I was saying that Fred, being an older brother, is being cheeky and giving his younger brother something to worry about, even though there's nothing to worry about. Harry smiled weakly. So he's actually super nervous, okay? All he can do is just give you a small smile, which is very bad at hiding the fact that he's so nervous. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he did wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it in the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Okay. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. So we talked about this before, where they use sort of scrolls, right? Where it's like this, and then it's got a long roll of parchment. Okay, it's type of paper, and then they just roll it up instead of it being sliced A4 pieces of paper. Okay, so no staples basically. When I call your name, you'll put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted, she said. Abbott Hannah. A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment's pause. Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the Fat Friar waving merrily at her. Bones Susan. Okay, here it's likely that it's in the reverse order. So Abbott is her last name and Hannah is her first name, similar to Bones Susan. Okay. Hufflepuff, shouted the hat again, and Susan scuttled off to sit next to Hannah. Scuttled, also another good word. Okay, that means she scurried away, she scuttled away, she scampered away. So she rushed off quickly in a sort of random manner. Boot Terry. Ravenclaw. The table second from the left clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Brocklehurst Mandy went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Okay, so exploded with cheers. So it wasn't just a small, gradual cheer. They erupted in cheers. Okay, they were really happy about it. Bulstrode Millicent then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, after all he'd heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during gym at his old school. He had always been last to be chosen. Not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch Fletchley Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Okay, the sandy-haired boy was actually the person who was in front of Harry in the line earlier, right? So they say this. Okay, so it was Seamus Finnegan, and then it was Harry, and then Ron was behind him. Granger Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the school and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. So she didn't just put it on gently, she jammed it. Okay, she was so excited she wanted to know yesterday. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. Ron groaned. Okay, because one thing, he's sort of expecting to be in Gryffindor, but two, he's worried about that he wouldn't get into Gryffindor because his whole family is in Gryffindor ahead of him. Okay, and now if he does get in Gryffindor, this person that he's already declared to himself that he doesn't like is also in Gryffindor. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with a hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he'd better get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted, "Gryffindor!" Neville ran off, still wearing it, and had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDougal Marag. Gales of laughter, also a good expression, okay? So everybody was cackling. They were very, very amused because he didn't remove his hat. Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, "Slytherin!" Malfoy went to join his friends, Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Nott, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, then Perks, Sally Ann, and then, at last, Potter Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out, like little hissing fires all over the hall. Okay, so while everybody else was always really like poised and ready for the people to be announced, now, okay, they hear Harry Potter and immediately everybody's whispering because it's something big to them, right? Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was a hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. There's talent. Oh, my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, eh? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. No doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor. Harry heard the hat shout the last word to the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin, he hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer yet. Percy the prefect got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley twins yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the rough he'd seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry the sudden, horrible feeling he just plunged it into a bucket of ice-cold water. So a lot of things to unpack here, but basically, unlike the other students, well, we don't know if they actually spoke to the hat or not, but Harry very much did, okay? Because the Sorting Hat seemed a little bit confused, right? Whether to place him in which house. So instead, here, he was very sure that he did not want to be Slytherin. He thought they were very unpleasant. He does not like Draco Malfoy. So, and everything he knows about Slytherin has to do with you-know-who, which he's also terrified about. Still doesn't know enough about. So here he says, anything but Slytherin. Okay, so he got his wish. So he got into Gryffindor together with Ron, Seamus, as well as Hermione so far. Okay, and everyone is clearly really, really happy because he says here that he didn't realize he's getting the loudest cheer yet. Okay, Percy, the twins, everyone was shaking his hand about it. And then they also describe this. So we don't know anything about the ghosts very much, but now we do know that it feels, when they touch you, it feels like he was plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. So interesting descriptions. He could see the high table properly now. At the end, nearest him, sat Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him the thumbs up. Harry grinned back. And there, in the centre of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card he'd gotten out of the chocolate frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in this whole hall that shone as brightly as the ghost's. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the leaky cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. And now there were only 4 people left to be sorted. Thomas, Dean, a black boy, even taller than Ron, joined Harry at the Gryffindor table. Turpin Lisa became a Ravenclaw, then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green by now. Okay, so we know that he is absolutely sick. He's too terrified to find out what's going on, but he needs this to be done and over with. Harry crossed his fingers under the table, and a second later the hat had shouted, "Gryffindor!" Harry clapped loudly with the rest as Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. "Well done, Ron. Excellent," said Percy Weasley pompously across Harry as Zabini Blaze was made a Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat away. So a few things. So now that we know Ron is also in Gryffindor, and Harry is quite fond of him, right? So he was hoping on Ron's behalf as well as his own that Ron would be in the same house with him. And then we know that Percy is a little bit of a complex because he's the head boy this year. He's very happy about it. So Percy Weasley said pompously, whereas earlier when he was happy about Harry getting in Gryffindor, he said, Percy the prefect got up and shook his hand vigorously. Okay, so he's really excited about Harry getting into Gryffindor. But with Ron, which is his own brother, okay, Percy Weasley pompously across Harry, meaning very uppity in an air that's sort of like, good for you, like good joining the rest of us here, in a sort of certain air. Harry looked down at his empty gold plate. He had only just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasties seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms opened wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit, Blubber, Oddbent, Tweak. Thank you." He sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not, because what does that even mean, right? Is he a bit mad? He asked Percy uncertainly. "Mad?" said Percy airily. "He's a genius. Best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry?" And notice how they're glazing over this information again. Similar to how when the ghosts were introduced, the language used is very, very casual. Like, okay, so they are ghosts. Whereas everybody else in the room, including Harry, is like, what is going on? Am I being pranked right now? Same thing for this, okay? You're expecting the headmaster, who looks very regal in his very gold chair, okay, to stand up and say something important. And all he says are 4 words that make no sense to Harry. Nitwit, Blubber, Oddbent, Tweak, okay? We will come back to that later when we figure out what that is, but for now, that's it. Okay? Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he liked to eat on one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops and lamb chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and, for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs. The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything, except the peppermints, and began to eat. It was all delicious. So we know that, unlike the Dursleys, okay, Harry is someone who really enjoys this feast because he's never had all this food to his disposal that he didn't have to share with anybody, or that he had to give up to Dudley. Okay, he could eat as much as he wanted, and there would be food there still enough for him. "Oh, that does look good," said the ghost in the ruff sadly, watching Harry cut up his steak. "Can't you?" "I haven't eaten for nearly 500 years," said the ghost. "I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Poppington at your service." resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower. I know who you are, said Ron suddenly. My brothers told me all about you. You're nearly Headless Nick. I would prefer you to call me Sir Nicholas de Mimsy, the ghost began stiffly, but sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. Nearly headless? How can you be nearly headless? Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if their little chat wasn't going all the way he wanted. Miffed meaning annoyed, okay? He looked very, very this is not what I want to talk about. I was trying to show you how cool and charming I am. Okay, call me Sir Nicholas, take me seriously, but the kids obviously are not. Like this, he said irritably. He seized his left ear and pulled. His whole head swung off his neck and fell onto his shoulder as if it was a hinge. Someone had obviously tried to behead him, but not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned looks on their faces, nearly headless Nick flipped his head back onto his neck, coughed, and said, So, new Gryffindors, I hope you're going to help us win the house championship this year. Gryffindors have never gone so long without winning. Slytherins got the cup 6 years in a row. The Bloody Baron's becoming almost unbearable. He's the Slytherin ghost. So now, so many things have happened in this chapter, okay? So we've gotten our houses, okay? We learned a little bit about the ghosts. They're very eccentric, very strange. We know that the Gryffindor house ghost is Sir Nicholas, who has been nearly beheaded, but not entirely, because his head is still attached with a little piece of flesh. Okay, very, very strange, very interesting. Okay, we know that Albus Dumbledore is also a little bit of a strange person. Okay, so Harry has so many more questions than he has answers now. Okay, but there is some comfort in knowing that he's at least in Gryffindor with people that he likes. Okay, yeah. So I guess this is towards the end of chapter 7. We can stop here for today. Okay, it is 1:30, so I will give you the rest of your time back. So thank you so much for joining us today for lunch. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the chapter so far. Okay, we will continue in the coming weeks. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye.